Hi guys, welcome to episode 1 of what I think could be a really interesting series, which at the moment I'm calling Explore the Edit, because I've had a lot of requests, and this happens all the time when I post something slightly interesting or slightly dramatic on Instagram, that inevitably somebody messages me saying, can we have an editing tutorial for that? And I have to admit, this always upsets me a little bit because there are already over 20 tutorials on the website, and they take me maybe 6 hours to make a tutorial. And I take it a little bit personally because it always feels like I'm not doing enough. So I was thinking about the question behind, can we have this as a tutorial? When you already have so many tutorials, you have my full workflow multiple times, and the reality is that 99.9% of the photos that you see of mine on Instagram are edited using some variation of my normal workflow. Maybe there's an extra layer here or there, or I do something a little bit unusual with a color balance layer that I wouldn't normally do. But the fact is that you already have my process many times in many variations, and I don't necessarily feel that there is value for either of us in creating another 2-hour tutorial where I'm explaining the same processes, the same steps, the same tools. You're watching me mask things out the same way as I always do. When all of us are time poor, I'm time poor, you're time poor, one of the main things I hear from members is I don't have time to learn. So I thought, what is the driving factor behind asking for another tutorial apart from seeing a cool looking photo and wanting to know how it was created? And I think that that is the key. You see a cool photo like the sun rays or Loki on the mountain with the pinky purple sky, or the fog photos with the lantern, and it's like, that's cool. I want to know how that was made. And when you have all of the resources available to you that you have, and all of the editing tutorials that you already have, it's not really necessary to make another whole tutorial on that, but rather to break down how the tools and techniques that you already have access to went into creating that photo, because the tools are always the same. I'm never doing anything particularly unusual. I'm just using the exact same tools as I've talked about in the editing colors workshop to make things more blue, or using a gradient to make the lamp a little bit more shiny. Tools that you are using every single day in your edits, tools that are in every single one of my editing tutorials, I'm using perhaps in slightly different ways in these photos. So what I thought would be more valuable and more interesting would be to break down the edit itself without it being a tutorial. Go through what I did in Lightroom, have a look at all the radial filters and explain what they're doing, if they're even doing anything unusual, because I have a feeling they're going to be doing exactly the same as normal. Then go through each of the layers in Photoshop and talk very briefly about the effect that each layer is creating, rather than sitting there going, right, now we're going to shape the light. We're going to shape the light in from this direction because blah, because you already have resources on all those things. So hopefully this will be an interesting way for you to see how you can use some tools and techniques in different ways, how they can be applied to create certain effects in certain photos, and there'll be a lot more of an efficient use of your time than another 2-hour editing tutorial where we go through things that you already know or already have access to. So let's see how it goes. It's a little bit of an experiment. I would really love it if you can give me some feedback in the community about this format and whether this is a way to go. This doesn't mean we won't be doing any new tutorials ever, but it is a nice supplemental way to help you guys discover how to use tools in different ways than just making another tutorial. So the one that I got 2 requests for was this photo of Journey sitting in the foggy forest with his little lantern. Okay, so what we're looking at right now is the raw file. I know we're in Photoshop, but because I work as a smart object, so this is my finished edit. This is all it took. This is actually not a lot of layers for me. And because I open this as a smart object, we are able to jump back into all of the Lightroom adjustments and Lightroom masks that went into this Lightroom version. So let me double click on here and we're going to have a look at what I did in Lightroom first before we come back to have a look at all of the layers in Photoshop. All right, so first things first, there's the normal exact thing that there always is in the light section. Highlights down a little bit for the light in the background, shadows up a little bit. Nothing particularly exciting there. White balance, I probably actually warmed it up a little bit. Yep, you can see just a tiny bit here. You can see the settings change as I do the before and after. And you can see I brought down the magenta as well because it was feeling very magenta. I took a lot of the saturation out of the greens here and a little bit out of the yellows and bumped the yellows towards green and bumped the greens towards cyan and didn't touch the luminance there. So if we just turn these settings on and off, you'll see we had quite greeny yellow moss, and I was already heading toward that more deep forest green moss that I like. So just taking a bunch of that yellow out and a bunch of the saturation out of the green so it wasn't so strong. And other than that, in these global adjustments, there would have been some fringing here from my 85mm lens, and I knew that I had to fix that up. I think I would have been seeing it probably just around his little snout. Let me turn this one off and on again. You can see it's there, sort of a slight pinky purple along the edge of his nose here, but otherwise quite fine. So then, of course, the main work came in here in the selective edits. So we started, as always, with a radial, pulling up the whites and also pulling up the shadows a little bit. So we can turn that on and off again, and you can see that is already adding quite a lot of light to his face. Next, we had the one over his whole eye. Nope, this would have been catch lights. This would have been a catch light one. Pulling up the shadows, pulling up the whites, and lowering the saturation there. So that is just getting a lot more color in, a lot more light in the catch light. Then we had this section here, which was looking quite dark on his chest. So pulling down the saturation, shadows and whites up, because otherwise it was very, very yellow and very, very shadowy, and I didn't like it. So that's that one. This little patch of his little chest here was looking very green. So just adding some magenta there to cancel out the green. You can see there it's a little bit green. That's just going to cancel it out. Then we had this section over here pulling down the highlights and possibly pulling down the clarity as well. Also adding some dehaze, so giving it a little bit more of a foggy dehaze effect. So that's the before, that's the after. So just toning down those highlights there. Same as here, pulling down the highlights, pulling the clarity right down and making that also a little bit more hazy. Keep in mind it was quite foggy when we were taking these photos, but you know, we can add a little bit more fog there for a bit more of a foggy effect. This is going to be just in his ear, which was looking very black. So just pulling the shadows up there. And then we had a couple of linear gradients here just down the bottom and over to the side, just already starting to shape the light. You can see that that made a huge difference to that dark shadowy mood there. So really just dropping the exposure a lot. I don't usually do that in Lightroom, so I don't know if this was like a quick edit for a TikTok or something and then I just left it there, but anyways, it's fine. Then under his chin was looking quite colored as well, and just taking some color cast out of there. And then we had two more very small highlight spots there and just dropping the highlights on those. So that got us to our Lightroom edit, so we went from that. Okay, so evidently Photoshop just crashed, but you could see that the edit that we did in Lightroom was nothing particularly exciting compared to what I normally do. There was a couple of other color casts to correct, and I added the darkness down the bottom, but that was about all that was different there. So the next thing that I did was to do a high pass action. You can find this in my editing eyes lesson. So I would have just run that on there and then masked that in over his eyes just to help his little eye there be a bit sharper. And you can see it makes a pretty big difference, just brightens up the highlights there and brings a little bit more detail in. I then noticed that from the straight out of camera to the edit I ended up with, it felt a little bit on a wonky angle. So I did a generative expand to just fill in this corner after twisting the photo with the crop tool. In the October critique, I show how to do that about 50 times. So if you're not sure how to do generative expand using the crop tool, just go to any of the 3 parts of the October critiques and you can search the transcription for generative expand and you'll be able to jump to the part of the video where that is. So then we start getting into the good stuff. First of all, we have a curves layer that is pretty much entirely darkening it. We have pulled the blacks up by 8, and that is in this kind of circular shape. So all of this is dark, but the top here ended up very dark, so I took it off of there. So that is how that effect looks. Just starting to close in some of the area around, same normal process. Next one is pulling down the shadows just a little bit and not touching the blacks this time. This is just darkening everything, and I masked Journey out a bit, apart from his back shoulder here where he should be more shadowed, and I think I took it off of here because the light would sort of fall off into that direction, but otherwise pretty much everywhere got this darkening effect because I wanted it to be a very extremely dark mood compared to my normal photos. So the next one is shaping the light, but because of the lantern, this one's a bit interesting. Normally I would shape the light in from the top because that is the light source, but in this case I wanted the light source to be the lantern. So the light kind of needed to be centered more on the light than anywhere else. But you can see I'm still brushing it onto the edge of Journey's shoulder here, so that will still be naturally shadowed because of course the lantern, you can see how far it goes to here and it goes to here. And of course this is still creating fake light, but I didn't want light from above or in from the side this time because I wanted the lantern to feel like it was the light in the dark. So that's why we're shaping the light in from there and removing it from these highlights in the background because I didn't want them to be brighter than they already were. Next was a gradient map. This is adding a little bit of warmth to the highlights and a little bit of cyan to the shadows. So not a huge change, but just putting a little bit of warmth there. Again, it's kind of like the light coming off of the lantern. And then we have 2 gradients. Both of them are reasonably warm. I think they're pretty much duplicates of each other. One is on the overlay blend mode, so that one looks like that. And the other is the smaller one that is on lighter color. I just play with blend modes until I find something that I like. So the first one is kind of doing a more like wider spread of light and is even on Journey just because of the way that the blend mode works. I didn't mind how it affected him. I liked that it really lit him up, and so I just left that on everything. And then the next one was the much smaller one, just giving a little bit of extra glow to the lantern, and this time masking him out and this part of the log that would be in shadow, and it's small enough that it doesn't reach the back of him. So that one's just adding a bit more glow. You can see this looks like a light. This one has the glow and opacity there, 28, opacity here, 48. So this one obviously a lot lower opacity. Then we've got a curves layer that is brightening up his face, the top of his face there. So again, him getting, no, the lantern isn't actually lighting up his face, but we aren't generally clever enough to really question it that much, but be like, there's a lantern there, so things must be lit up. And obviously I want you to look at his face. So this is one time where I break the where would the light be hitting naturally rule and just put it kind of where I need it. As long as it still stays, like I still haven't masked in over to here. So it's still natural-ish. Next one is a levels layer. So this one is just adding a little bit of strength to the blacks, and it's brightening up the whites and the highlights a lot. And I've taken it off of these highlights in the background and off of the lamp and off of the bright parts of Journey. So that just looks like that, and that is helping him a little, and it's also making some of the other highlights glow just a bit more and everything have a little bit more contrast. Next is a hue saturation layer, just taking down the saturation on his chest. That to me makes a big difference, but I definitely wanted to leave a bit of a yellow tone in here so that it still felt natural with the lantern. So not taking this down to 100, just to 34. Another hue saturation layer, this one a lot more specific just on this part of his chest. Let me just zoom in there and we can see what's going on. Just taking out a little bit more of that strong yellowy green tone there and there. So just working with some color cast that I was noticing. Next one is an interesting one that I really haven't talked about because I literally don't use this unless I'm doing some kind of nighttime photo, but it's a color lookup. So it's just a normal adjustment layer color lookup. I've chosen the Moonlight LUT. So LUT files are usually for video editing, but they can sometimes be helpful if you want to add some kind of effect to your image. Like I said, I don't use them a lot. I've used them for the fireflies and I've used them for this, and those are the times that I generally use them. But there's a bunch of different options here, and most of them are a bit much or a bit extreme. But you can potentially play with them and adjust the opacity, adjust the blend mode, blah, blah, blah. And you can get some quite cool effects from them if you need something a little bit more extreme or something that's doing something a bit different. Some of them will add like a bit more contrast to things. So they can be fun to play with. But anyway, this one was on color blend mode and 13%. It's just adding a little bit of blue. That's it. I masked Journey out again and a lot of the ground because I felt like it was cool enough. Then I duplicated it, but this time we're on soft light, so this time we're getting the contrast as well as the color. Opacity at 27%, and you can see it's just kind of darkened it, added a little bit more blue, and made it all a little bit more dramatic. This time masking it off of a couple more places, keeping it on Journey's shoulder again for the shadows and to make sure that the blue is in the shadows. And then we're nearly on the home stretch. So then we had one curves layer brightening up Journey. This looks like a dodge layer to me. So just filling in those highlights. Color balance layer, adding some yellow to his face. So just where this warm light would be hitting, kind of. Then we had the burn layer. So again, just filling in those shadows. And last, a levels layer, adding a touch more contrast just to Journey because he felt a little bit hazy and a little bit washed out. So by pulling up the blacks here, and I don't think I did touch that, and just adding a little bit more light there, we're just getting a bit more contrast on him and making him really strong because there is so much strong contrast in the surroundings. So that is what went into this edit. Please let me know if you found this useful. As you can see, there wasn't really anything particularly different or exciting except for where the light was shaped in a way that made sense for the lantern and for those two color lookup layers. The rest of it was pretty much the same. So if this helps you edit a photo of your own, please let me know. And if you like this kind of format, let me know as well, because I'm looking forward to hearing your feedback, because this is a lot easier to create than another full tutorial that nobody's going to watch. So hopefully maybe this is a way that you guys can explore what went into the edit of a photo without needing to sit through 2 hours of a tutorial. But definitely let me know your thoughts and feedback because I would love to hear them.